So cruisers have been hard to play, haven't they, in the last patch with Deadeye? They've been difficult, battleships camping at the back, people not pushing in, and cruisers struggling to be in range without getting killed, right? Well, that's the narrative put forward by a lot of people in this game, but I actually don't believe that. I believe cruisers have been very easy to play and are in one of the most comfortable spots they've been in a long time. And to prove that, I'm going to play on accident. I didn't intend to have 13 kilometers of range, but I haven't played Smolensk since it's got nerfed, and I still had reload mod on. So we have a 13 kilometer range Smolensk game here. And I think cruisers are incredibly easy to play. Even a ship like Smolensk having 13 kilometers range. And you might think, well, yeah, that's because Smolensk is overpowered. I think this illustrates that even a ship with crazy little range in a tier 10 game is still able to have a massive impact. So a cruiser with 17 to 20 kilometers of range has a much easier time having large impact on games. There's also the fact that, well, cruisers have more armor now than they ever have. The amount of 30 millimeter plating is just incredible. And a lot of times people complain about Overmatch being too much in the game and that it hurts cruisers too much. And I guess for me, since I've played this game since launch, well, at launch, Zhao was the only cruiser with 30 millimeter plating on its upper belt and deck, Atago having 41 millimeter plating on its deck armor, and those were the only two cruisers that could bounce 406 millimeter shells, which was everything at high tier. Right? NC, Amagi, Izumo, Iowa, Montana, and of course Yamato. All overmatched 27 millimeters of plating. And that was the cruiser environment back in the day. Every battleship you faced at high tier would overmatch you. And that's not the case anymore. You have a lot of cruisers that have a lot of armor these days. So 457 millimeter battleships, just imagine every battleship tier 8 plus has 457 millimeter guns. That's essentially what World of Warships was back in the day. So I think cruisers have it pretty easy. I do. They're very maneuverable. They have good armor. They have great concealment. They have tons of DPM. They set a ton of fires, which do a ton of damage. And of course, there's also the fact that, well, they're small, so they get overpenned a lot. And catching a broadside cruiser in a battleship is not something that gets punished all the time, I would say. It's kind of a 50-50, it feels like, if you're going to dev strike them or you're just going to get a couple of overpens. So I do think that cruisers are quite easy to play. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, maybe, but you don't face that many battleships in this game. There's only 2 battleships. Well, that's true. There's not many battleships in this game. But I think that actually makes it a better argument that there's all of the counters for Smolensk in this game. You've got radar Worcesters, you've got a Minotaur, you've got a Petropavlovsk, and you've got a Venezia. And an FDR to spot you, and all of these destroyers to torp you and smoke. I think this is probably going to be one of the harder games to get damage out of. Right, to have a good damage game out of a 2 battleship, bunch of radar cruisers, and you only have 13 kilometers of range, I think it's really a difficult match to get a lot of damage out of. And that's why I want to show you this one, because I think it proves that even with no range in a squishy cruiser against all of its counters, you can still have massive impact. And what does that say about cruisers with 20 kilometers range and more armor, right? It says that they'll have an even easier time having big impact on matches. So with the Smolensk, we've done 57k damage so far, 10 minutes into the match. Really not that impressive yet. But of course, the ship is best at stopping pushes. And you notice that we have all the caps. So the enemy team has to push onto the caps. So that's where I'm trying to get into a position to cover both A and B, depending on which one they go for. And it seems like they're deciding to go for B. And As long as we have like a Holland spotting for me, there's no way they're ever going to get B, right? This Holland just has to sit in this gap, torping and spotting for me, and there's basically no way they get B. So we're in a pretty solid position here. And with the Smolensk, of course, you have the bonus of just being able to smoke up. But let's be honest, there's so many islands on these maps that even if you don't have smoke, it's pretty easy to shoot from cover and not be detected, right? I don't think it's that hard to position yourself in such a way where you're not going to get detected by incoming ships and you're able to farm them from over islands from complete safety. But of course, having a smoke definitely does help. I think that having this 13 kilometers of range definitely makes up for Smolensk being overpowered. I still think this ship is broken and too powerful for what it is, because just the damage output is just insane. Fire chance, shell velocity, all this stuff. It's just too good, I think. It's so good that we can actually trace this Vermont with our shell tracers and the shell impacts and just keep hitting him while he's dark. That's kind of ridiculous, I think. But yeah, like I said earlier, if our destroyers had just spotted, there would be no way they would get the cap. Unless that Minotaur hides, I guess. But we certainly would have had more damage on the Vermont. But there you can see, we're up to 100,000 damage, just like that. 50k damage in like a minute and a half, right? That's how good this cruiser is. And I would say other cruisers would have done potentially more damage in this amount of time because you would have had more range to shoot at more things throughout the map. Also, the longer range, heavier cruisers have the ability to pen 32 millimeters of armor. And that's a huge bonus when you're fighting battleships, because battleships often have a lot of 32 millimeter armor. Now, we do get radared, so that's a little spooky. So I'm wondering if that's Minotaur radar or if it's actually the Worcester pushing up, that kind of thing. I'm a little bit nervous about that. So we have to run away, of course. But this is the counter to the Smolensk, right? It's not easy to play 13 kilometer Smolensk into all these radars. We're a squishy ship with not much HP, and cruisers have the ability to absolutely wreck you. And that's why I think this game is so impressive, in my opinion, because we do have these scenarios where we're fighting ships that we can't pen with our AG, but they can pen us with their HE, right? That's the big downside of having destroyer level HE, is you can't pen 25 millimeter sides like the Worcester. You can see the Vermont just overpenned on us. But this is exactly what I'm talking about, when you can where you can find islands to shoot over in ships without smoke. Just like this. All you got to do is find an island like this and just shoot over it, and it's pretty much relative safety, right? It's pretty easy to find islands like this on basically every map, I would say. Now, we do get spotted by the Minotaur. We're going to go forward and turn in so we can isolate the fight. Right? Just like in battleships and brawling, you want to isolate 1v1s in cruisers, right? It's good practice in any ship. We don't want to get shot at by the Worcester and the Minotaur at the same time. And of course, because our smoke comes up, we're going to use that to try and save as much health as we possibly can, right? And we know the Worcester used his radar already, so we're relatively safe in this smoke. Although, I do decide to leave it because I don't want to get into a close range brawl with a Worcester who has hydro, right? He's got a 5 kilometer hydro, so that smoke wouldn't really help me that much. So we decide to run away. But we're up to 131,000 damage. And I do think this really does show you how easy Cruiser is. Even in the campiest meta we've had, a 13 kilometer range ship can still get an above average game, right? It's still possible. So I do really think that Cruiser's in a good spot. Obviously, Deadeye was removed today. Actually, yesterday it was removed. I'm recording this on Wednesday. And we're yet to see what that does to the meta. My prediction has been that removing Deadeye won't change anything, because battleships have been camping well outside of Deadeye range. If they were only interested in activating their Deadeye, wouldn't they be around 14 kilometers away from the nearest ship? Right? Activating Deadeye, but still being as close as possible to get the most out of their get the most out of their ship, have the easiest shot possible, right? But they haven't been. They've been camping at 20 kilometers. So in my mind, that means they're not actually camping because of Deadeye. They're camping for other reasons. And I think it's because of how ridiculously good cruisers and destroyers, and of course aircraft carriers, are at punishing a big giant ship for pushing up. So I don't think this is the last we've seen of the campy playstyle and meta. I think the battleships will continue to not push because they're really not rewarded for it, in my mind. You're really not rewarded for pushing in outside of basically losing your entire ship. So to finish out this game, the enemy team has pushed into B successfully, as well as C. We are in danger of losing this match, especially if I die, and it's very easy to die to a Petro, which is why I'm just running away and trying to keep these islands in between myself and the Petro. But now that I see him turning and running away, I decide to push back in. But we never actually end up getting to anybody. So this is the match. 500 hits, 152k damage with a Smolensk that has no range in the campiest meta possible, right? I do think that cruisers are pretty easy to play these days, and that even with the meta being so campy and having to shoot at longer ranges, it's still possible to use all the islands to push up and punish people for pushing in. It's not that hard, and I think cruisers are probably in the best state that they've ever been in terms of armor and DPM, range, and the ability to just counter people who push in. The DPM has increased a ton over time. Just look at how Zhao went from being seen as this kind of overpowered ship back in the day to now being one of the worst cruisers at tier 10. I think that's really all that needs to be said, right, about the meta. So that's my thoughts on cruiser games and how good cruisers are. I do think they are pretty amazing right now. So the way I've got my Smolensk set up is, I think, pretty standard, right? It's a DPM build, getting heavy HE in there, and top grade gunner for those really close range fights where you want to get extra DPM. Concealment, pretty standard. Superintendent to get the more heals and smokes, all that good stuff. More DPM from Adrenaline Rush. Buffing our AA is definitely nice, of course, having pretty decent AA already. Keeping the carriers off of you. There's a couple of different skills here that you could certainly consider taking, but I decided on AA. Gun feeder, allowing me to switch ammo types faster. This is more for the heavy cruisers that I'm playing, but it's not bad on this ship either. And grease the gears, again, more for the heavy cruisers that I'm playing, but there's not that amazing upgrades here. If you're doing specifically Smolensk, maybe you go Last Stand and maybe Pyrotechnician, something like that, instead of some of these. But I think the majority of the tier 3 and 4 skills are going to look like that for Smolensk. In that game, of course, I was running the reload mod, which ended up giving me that 13 kilometers of range. Now we have 16 with range mod. That's going to be the way you want to actually play it. You could see how difficult it was to actually get in range of things a lot of the time. Prop mod, aiming systems mod, engine room protection, main armaments mod. Pretty standard, I think. And that's the Smolensk. I think, yeah, cruisers are pretty easy to play. Obviously, I know Smolensk is a overpowered cruiser, but playing it with 13 kilometers of range, I think makes it difficult enough that I can safely say other cruisers with more range but less DPM would have done just as well. So, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.